the idea of traveling along a road to a destination and reaching that destination after the perils. The analogy, right, to heaven is just so strong and so visceral. And it was just such a cool embodiment of the Christian walk, literally, and the Christian faith in a way that you can't just replicate, like going on a walk and then having a late lunch in Iowa.
Welcome to Hallway Conversations. We're a trio of educators who have plenty of questions about teaching and learning and school culture, and we believe in the value of reflection and collaboration as we seek to keep growing as teachers. This podcast is our place for thinking out loud together about issues in education and why they might matter to Christian educators. Welcome to the conversation.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the 98th episode of the Hallway Conversations podcast. My name is Matt Beamers.
I'm Abby De Groot.
And I'm Dave Mulder.
Friends, we're always looking for topics of conversation and feedback, so please email us or send us a recording of your questions to hallwayconvospod@gmail.com. That's hallwayconvospod@gmail.com. We're looking for relevant and timely ideas, so please let us know if you have a show topic ruminating around in your head.
So if you haven't listened to our last episode, you really should go back and listen to that one first, and that'll make this episode make a whole lot more sense, just to be very candid about it. But we have a couple of guests with us today, and Abby De Groot, who is also a co-host on the podcast, is also a guest today, because she's part of the story. And a couple of our other colleagues from around campus here. We have Dr. Rikki, Brons, who teaches in Spanish, and Dr. Gayle Doornbos, who teaches in theology. Thank you guys for being here with us today.
It's great to be here. It's a pleasure.
Thank you. And we're talking about pilgrimage. We're talking about being out on the way. And in particular, you're talking about the Camino de Santiago in Spain. And could you maybe just, for those who haven't heard our last episode, give a real short, what is the Camino?
Yeah, the Camino is one of the ancient pilgrimage paths that began in the Middle Ages in the 9th century. It was one of the three major pilgrimages in the medieval world, with Rome and Jerusalem, and it is multiple paths all leading to Santiago de Compostela, where there is a cathedral and the supposed remains of St. James the Apostle. Okay. And so it's a way that people walk to get to Santiago.
And I'd love to think today a little bit about the idea of pilgrimage. And if you haven't listened to our last episode, listeners, you really should go back, because you kind of get a better sense of what brought these ladies onto this pilgrimage. But what I'm really curious about today is, what would you say is the purpose of pilgrimage? Why would somebody want to go on pilgrimage? What's the intended outcome, I guess? Is there an intended outcome? That's a broad question.
I think that's deeply personal for each person going there. Well, traditionally, it was a religious tradition for a variety of reasons. Really, for pilgrims today, just like the three of us, people have personal reasons on going there, and some do it for the sports aspect of it. I know a lot of Germans are on the way, showing how fast they can walk and how efficient they can get the thing done. Then there's others who want to find themselves after experiencing burnout in their both academic and other working lives. To go back to who am I and what is my purpose in life. As I look around the table here, we're all in our middle ages, and so this idea of reevaluating who we are as people, right? Like our careers are well on their way. Whether they are at a point that we are happy with or not is actually quite beside the point. We have families or have experienced difficulties in relationships or are all at different points. And so I think for us, the three of us, part of it was taking actually a time out and to say, who am I? Who am I in Christ? Am I forgetting about the important pieces while I'm on this hamster wheel that I don't seem to get off of? Week by week goes by and I'm trying to be as productive as I can, but is that really all there is to life?
I noticed in our last episode, Abby, you talked about, hey, lunch was at 2:00. This was a beautiful thing. These were good days. And I know it was hard work, so, and maybe I'm asking this a bit facetiously. I am asking it facetiously, but you can walk and have late lunch. You can do those things here. You can do that in Iowa. And I guess that maybe piggybacking on Dave's question, because because I do feel like as I hear the word pilgrimage, like for me, honestly, it's like, oh, like I'd long to do that. Like even the word itself makes me want to go. And so I'm just wondering maybe if you can just take that one step further. Like why was it important to go from here and do something that technically you could do here? Like why go?
Right. I think part of it is just the beauty of the tradition, and I mean the phrase of like such a great cloud of witnesses, right? So it's a route that has been walked for thousands, literally. Is that right? Thousands?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
I'm just making sure.
Yep.
Of years, and we went to Mass at Santiago when we got there, and several times actually along the way. But to be in the place as everyone, there are hundreds of pilgrims coming into Santiago, right, on the same day, and there's a Camino Mass in this beautiful cathedral. So we went to the evening Mass, and there was a priest singing as all the Catholics in the audience came and took communion, and just the feeling of community among the body of Christ, right? And so that universal faith and the idea of traveling along a road to a destination and reaching that destination after the perils. The analogy, right, to heaven is just so strong and so visceral. And it was just such a cool embodiment of the Christian walk, literally, and the Christian faith in a way that you can't just replicate, like going on a walk and then having a late lunch in Iowa.
Yeah. And I would say that one of the things that defines a pilgrimage is that it has a destination, that it's a journey with a specified destination. Yeah. And so the journey can look all sorts of different ways, and there can be surprises along the way, but it's different than just going on a trip because there's a defined destination. And like Abby was talking about, one of the most common definitions or descriptions of the Christian life throughout the history of the church has been that we are on pilgrimage, that we are people on the way with a particular destination, with an end in mind. And so I think one of the beautiful things about sort of place pilgrimage, which is what the Camino is, it's a pilgrimage to a particular place, is it is a sort of lived embodiment of the kind of thing that our whole life is. And so I think one of the things that is true is that place pilgrimage has a power to it, has a power to help us think about what our faith is in an embodied way. But even as I come back, it's not that only pilgrimage to place is a kind of pilgrimage. I think we live in the midst of pilgrimage. We are a people on the way, and there can be all sorts of different ways of living that out in our daily life. That going on a particular kind of pilgrimage that's a very specified space of time can really transform the way we are when we come back, as we think about my whole life being oriented towards final and full communion with God.
Right.
Yeah. One other thing I want to add to that is, as we're experiencing this life, being out of our comfort zone is a big additive to that. So while I can walk in Iowa and I can have a late lunch at my next pizza ranch if that's what I want to do,
Sorry, pizza ranch.
being in it.
Pizza Ranch is not going to be sponsored.
I am just saying, for me, right? Like the things that we're familiar with, whether it's the food that we eat, the language that we speak, the people we're surrounded by that look more or less like us. There is something about being out of your comfort zone in this way. And so this cultural exploration of who's my neighbor? Who am I when I'm the minority? Who am I when I'm the one that doesn't speak the language or that can't make himself or herself understood? Is a big part of this perspective seeking and this how do I fit into that cloud that Abby was talking about.
And Gayle and I had more of that experience than Rikki, who is a fluent speaker of the language.
So after that, you were convinced I can order my cafe con leche. We don't need Rikki anymore.
Well, I mean,
it was short-lived.
It was very short-lived.
Non-need Rikki seems like a bit of an overstatement.
You did well.
We could
You
order
did well.
Yeah, we could order food and find directions.
Yes.
Hey, you've all talked a little bit about this last episode and now the sense of neighborness and like who is the other and coming across, learning about other cultures and people and and I'm not asking this as asking you to bare your soul, but like, what did you learn about yourself? Can I ask that? Like, you know, like you talk about, hey, here's what I learned about others, but how about, is there something you could share in that area? And I'm not trying to be too personal, but just, some reflections on that.
I think for me, one of the biggest takeaways is that while I can be self-sufficient in a lot of ways and often pride myself on being able to figure it out and do it without somebody else's help, is that this walk that we're doing through life is really not something we're meant to do alone. Mm-hmm. And so whether I needed the support of my colleagues to make it through a tough emotional part of the journey or a tough physical part, I am the one that ended up with a pretty blistered little toe.
Both
this
Abby,
I did as well.
both Abby and Rikki are rock stars. The blisters they had on their feet were not little and not insignificant. So
That's okay.
the listeners should know that they are rock stars.
No, but this idea, like, we know that we're supposed to do it in community, but in my life, often it creeps in. Well, if I don't do it, then it's not going to be done right, and I could just do it because then somebody else doesn't have to worry about it. So both I do it better, and also I don't want to burden anyone else with my stuff. Mm-hmm. This walk really emphasized to me, but both in the group of 7 that we were in, but also watching others, that we are meant to do this together, and that there's so much joy in doing it together, that I'm missing out if I don't allow others in to walk alongside me and to carry my burden with me.
That's really good. Yeah, I think for me, a big part of the pilgrimage itself was just thinking about my own responsibilities and the way that I carry those, and particularly with my family, that was a pretty big lift for me to leave for 2 weeks. And so thinking through, and like Rikki said, that aspect of letting other people in to talk about some of that, I think I learned a lot about myself. And also, I think part of it was just realizing that you sometimes need to step back from something in order to see it more clearly, whether that was parenting or like relationships at home. Just the absence of that sometimes is the best thing. Like, my kids are actually very self-sufficient, right? And
Turns out.
But when I'm there all of the time, they don't necessarily see that. And so just that shift of perspective, and for me as well, thinking through managing things or being in my job, just not having that opportunity. Like, I did not take my laptop. And so
How was that for you?
right. It was very different, to be honest. I don't think I've ever been away from it for 2 weeks since like this job, right? And so just that absence and that shift of pace, I just learned a lot about myself and about how I am at home, and also seeing yourself through other people's eyes who you've never met before, right? So we knew, the 3 of us knew each other, but there were 4 people. You knew Sharinda, Rikki knew Sharinda, but I had never met the 4 other people. And so even that, we did a beautiful thing at the end where we sat around after our last night in Santiago and just did affirmations for each
Looking
other.
at the Cathedral of Santiago de
Yes.
Compostela.
in a park,
Beautiful.
right?
Yes.
And
Yeah.
so even seeing yourself through other people's eyes, right, in ways that you hadn't known before. So I think it was a lot of just discovery, and through a change of scenery and a change of pace for me. Clarity.
Yeah, I think along with some of what you guys have said, the sort of dynamic of individual processing and communal processing, and seeing how much of that both are necessary to the walk of life, and seeing the ways in which that actually lived itself out on the Camino was really, I think, meaningful for me to see the ways in which individual time and processing can bring me back more richly to the group as a whole, and then the group as a whole then give me a richness to go back and spend some time processing. And so I think that was one thing I really learned. The other thing I spent a lot of time reflecting on the trip was the concept of hope, and particularly because pilgrimage is a journey to a destination, the idea that hope is the thing that drives us. And so this concept that I had one day where I was walking by myself, but by the end of the Camino, you are walking, even if you're walking alone, you're not by yourself. So you're sort of surrounded by a sea of people who are all walking in the same direction. I think it's just overwhelmed by the sense of the reality that they were all driven by a hope for something. Mm-hmm. Is it a hope for healing from a physical ailment? Is it a hope for healing from a spiritual depression of the soul? Is it the hope for processing something? Is it the hope to just get in shape? Is it the hope to just reach the destination and tick it off your box? I mean, all of these things are hopes that drove people. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of times, this is probably getting a little too conceptual, but I think a lot of times in the Christian life, we talk about the reality that we're people of faith, hope, and love, but it's really hard to see how hope actually impacts the day-to-day life, right? And so this sense of an embodied reality of a hope to get to this final destination, I think it just got me thinking a lot about what does it look like to reorient, because my hopes, my ultimate hopes that actually can inform and drive my engagement today and support it in a way that's meaningful, and thinking about that in light of the final end of our lives as Christians and having that be my final hope. Because I think a lot of times what can happen, and I realized this on the trip, because when you finally detach yourself from all your responsibilities, you realize how much those sort of tyranny of the urgent, immediate things are driving you, and you start to it's very easy to shift my hopes towards, making sure that my students give me good evaluations, or like those like really practical things that come a part of lives of teachers, or just getting things done, but not actually seeing it in the right perspective. So I think that was one thing that really was a huge part of my Camino, and thinking about the reality that hope has driven pilgrims on that route since its beginning.
The analogy to teaching, though, reserved for all three of us all the time. So as we're thinking,
talked about it a lot.
Yes, as we're thinking about the bigger pictures in that and the personal ones, at the end of the day, we always talk shop and come back. How does this apply to the classroom? We are all on a journey
about that,
throughout a semester, right? You have a destination in mind, and sometimes you take detours, and often detours are the ones where a lot of learning happens, either through trial and failure or through unexpected successes, and you're doing it as a group. It's individual and it's communal. Like all the pieces that we have started to talk about, really, for us as teacher minds, come back to how does that shape my teaching practice? Actually, I do have routines set up, and they serve a purpose because they give us some footing in this unknown pace, or in this unknown,
we have a pattern, and we can set rhythms, and we know where we're going for lunch, and then we know where we're going for second coffee, and then we know where we're ending the day, right?
And we need breaks. They refresh everyone.
And also that experiential piece, right? So that was a big realization for me too, is how much I learned. I went on this trip knowing nothing, honestly, about the history of Spain. And so also that experiential piece of being in a place and surrounding yourself with sights and sounds and beautiful landscapes, and we're whole people, right? So we can't always expect our students to just sit in a room and take in. We also have to let them experience learning, and just the richness of that, and feeling like we got from one place to another together and experiencing that journey as educators.
I'm thinking a little bit about teachers who are listening. They're in their third, fourth week of school, and thinking about that image of carrying a pebble in your pocket, and for some of our teachers it's a rock, and for some it's a boulder, and they actually don't feel like they have a place to lay it down, because it is hard to find hope sometimes. And I guess I'm just thinking about the three of you out there, and it sounds like, I know it was an amazing trip, but there's no doubt there was hard moments on this trip. And again, not wanting to ask you to bare your soul, but what did you do there to help get you through a hard moment that might be a word of encouragement to some of the teachers listening who have had a hard start to their year?
Okay, I'm gonna use a blister analogy.
Yes, go for it.
Interestingly, so I I don't know if it was my socks or what it was. I broke my shoes in, but apapparently not well enough.
We don't have hills to practice on in
Correct.
Iowa, to be fair.
And I also didn't walk 16 miles at a time when
No.
breaking them in. So I had blisters form pretty early in the walking experience and then just keep coming back. I would pop them and they would put sterile strips over them every night. And then the next morning they would just reappear, right? By the time I started walking. And so every time we stopped for said coffee, I would have to get back up and it would be excruciating for like
Yes.
maybe half a mile. Like excruciating. And then I would get in a groove and keep going. But every single time I knew that I could get through that little excruciating part and get to a point where, I don't know, my brain just shut off the pain or something. Or it was just, I was in a groove and I could go. And so I think that's a great, I've thought of it actually a couple of times of when I don't want to start something that I just really don't want to do. Like if I just get through that first half a mile,
really unpleasant.
right, really, and just do it. And then once I get on a roll, it doesn't seem so bad anymore. And so, not that I want teachers to power through. I'm not trying to say that that it's about powering through, but it's about you can do hard things that you maybe think you can't do if you just take it a little bit at a time. It gets better.
I'm hearing you say too, like the longer view of
Yes.
what's happening here is maybe better.
Right.
Like, yeah.
Yeah.
For me, who also had the foot problems towards the end there, we had a choice to either carry our packs or to send them ahead on the Slick system where you put €5 in a little envelope and there are services that carry them to your next place where you're going to stay. And sometimes it's important to carry your own pack, but it is just as important to realize when it is time to let others help you carry your stuff. So I go back to the communal piece of just because I possibly can make it through on my own and carry my stuff, does that mean I should? And often the answer is you shouldn't. You can. I have faith in you that you will muscle through, you will power through, but that's not always the best answer. And so this idea when there's blisters in our lives, how do we treat them? Do we acknowledge them? Do we power through? Who do we have around us that can help make that pain better? And who can support us in a way? Finding that support system, I think, for the teaching career is super important.
And you can't ignore it. I mean, you
No.
have to treat it
We
effectively.
had to get treatment for both of you guys in some way, shape, or form. Yeah. My horrible experience was actually coming home. I had a pretty nightmare plane journey on the way home, and sort of realizing how quickly all of the lessons
Wait, you picked up your burdens again.
and rest and delight of the Camino sort of faded away as my journey continued to reach almost levels of hilarious disaster. Yeah, I felt like I was stuck.
You were stuck, literally, for a long time.
Yeah, I thought I'm going to live in the Boston airport the rest of my life.
Yes.
I'm never leaving. And so I think one of the things is the reality that, I think we do need to take time to step away, especially in the moments where life seems to be completely falling apart, or it's like, wow, this is terrible, to remember back and to use these times that we get and to take them intentionally of rest and reorientation and really dig those deeply into our souls so that we can look back in the midst of sort of these new trials. And I think the other important thing that was true is we all had a group text going along. And so I was able to text everyone on the trip updates of what kept happening. Like,
Yes.
they lost my booking in London, and now my flight is canceled in Boston, and now I have to walk 3 miles, which isn't a huge deal, except for that it was on a highway in Boston.
This was insane.
It was insane.
Yeah.
And then there was also some very kind strangers along the way, which was
Yeah.
also a beautiful lesson in, people coming along and picking you up and driving you on the highway instead of you walking on it. Anyway, that's a story for another podcast. But I think also the reality of having witnesses to the struggle and support in the midst of it, so that you don't feel like you're alone. Like, I had to endure the trip alone, but I wasn't alone in the midst of it. And people sort of reflecting back to me as well, yeah, that is really bad. That's not fun.
It's not in your head.
Yeah, so that it's not just this spot where, you're in this cycle of complaining, but you're in this cycle of support. Was a really important lesson for me as I made my way back.
So if people are interested in learning more about going on the Camino themselves, what advice do you have? Where could they go to learn more?
Well, I think, is Sharonda doing this again at some point?
I believe so. So Encounters Travel for Transformation has a website with lots of a variety of travel experiences that people can go to.
And we'll link that
Yep.
in the show notes.
I think another thing to watch is the movie The Way, which we mentioned in the first episode of this podcast. Not as a preparatory video. It doesn't really tell you how to prepare and those kinds of things, but it does give you a really beautiful picture of what the Camino looks like and sort of what it can be like in terms of walking. I mean, I hesitate to just send people broadly to the internet. But
there are so
many resources about, people who have walked various parts of the way, the different routes that people have walked. So there are books that can guide you along and tell you what it's like to stay in the albergues, which are sort of these hostels, and there's different kinds of hostels, and there's different places that people generally stop. There's an app called The Wise Pilgrim. So if anybody is going on the Camino, it's a really great app that tells you, this town coming up will have a bathroom and a cafe and a place to stay, but
and
it
should
won't have
book ahead or should not book ahead.
Yeah,
yes,
but it might not have a pharmacy. For that, you're going to need to go a little bit further. So those would be some of the places that I would send people if they're really interested in doing this.
I also would encourage listeners to do it, even if you don't have a set group that you're going with. A Dort grad that we met on the way there, knowing that she was taking it. Recent grad of our program, one of our education students. We met Shannon and Leon, who had walked most of the way. So this idea of doing it solo or doing it with a group, to just not be afraid, with the right preparation, really anyone in any physical shape, in any age group, can do this.
Yeah.
All right, my last question is, you have to answer one of these two questions, either what surprised you about the trip, or what was your favorite part of the trip?
They're all deep in thought.
And if you can make it into one answer, good for you.
Yeah.
So I didn't know how beautiful it was going to be.
Yeah.
I didn't necessarily I, like Abby, didn't know very much about Spain or the history of Spain. And so even though I'd done some research on the Camino, I had no idea what it was going to look like. And I was astounded by its beauty. There were some mornings that were just unbelievable, with mist going through eucalyptus forests and like the sun streaming in. Like, it was unbelievable. So, I mean, that would probably be one of my biggest surprises. Also one of my favorite parts, because I love to be outside and I love hiking. But then also, like, just being with these people was for sure one of the best parts.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I was surprised by and loved the food more than I thought I would. So
good.
It was, and also just, it's like a menu that is particular almost to
Northern Spain.
Yeah, northern
its
Spain
region.
and the Camino. And so learning what those dishes were and encountering them again and again, like different versions of them at different places, and comparing those and trying new things. And it's just very different. And I loved that part of it, actually. So that was one of my favorite parts.
I think for the favorite part is for me, was to discover yet another facet of the country that I've loved for a really long time. So seeing the diversity even within a relatively small country like Spain. For the surprises part, yes, we were a group, and we were walking with thousands of pilgrims, relatively speaking, at the same time. And God showed up in different ways daily for us. And so in very personal ways, giving us little glimpses of, I see you, I hear you, I am with you. I guess I know that, and there are moments in our daily working lives or family lives or whatever where that shows up. but the specificity of how he showed up for each one of us on any given day, and we could see examples of that, of he did this for me and I found this for you. That was overwhelming to me. That sign of love of, yes, we are community and we're a great cloud of witnesses, but he loves each one of us individually in very specific ways.
Absolutely.
Beautiful. Friends, we know that your time is valuable, and we want to thank Rikki, Gayle, and Abby for joining us today for another hallway conversation. And whether it is this day, this week, this month, or this school year, we hope that the Lord gives you what you stand in need of. And we want to send you from here with this blessing. May the road rise up to meet you. May the wind be always at your back. May the sun shine warm upon your face. The rains fall soft upon your fields. And until we meet again, may God hold you in the palm of his hands. Thanks for listening, everyone. Have a good week.
This podcast was literally dreamed up during one of our actual hallway conversations. Our music is by Ethan Mulder. Hallway Conversations is created and produced by Matt Beamers, Abby De Groot, and Dave Mulder. Hey, we have a favor to ask of you. Would you be willing to rate this podcast or write a review in your podcast app? Or if you found this conversation interesting or helpful, would you consider sharing it on your social media? Those things really do help podcasters out, and we would be so, so grateful. Thanks for listening, friends. It's all going to come together.
You got this.
Holy cow. Try one more time.
Yeah.
Here we go. Take 4.